Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey is finally here, and let me tell you, it is an absolute mammoth of a film. We are talking about a grand American adaptation of Homer's legendary Greek epic, a story that has survived for thousands of years, now in the hands of one of our greatest living directors. At its core, this is definitive story of survival. It's about Odysseus returning home after a brutal victory in the Trojan War, only to get hopelessly lost at sea with his crew. But this isn't just a simple road trip movie on water. It's a story about the terrifying wrath of gods, specifically how Odysseus manages to offend Poseidon, the mighty god of the sea, storms, earthquakes, and horses. Because of this divine grudge, Poseidon throws every possible nightmarish obstacle at Odysseus, turning a simple voyage into a 2 decade long grueling ordeal. He makes his journey exponentially more difficult at every turn, but the tragedy doesn't end at sea. When Odysseus finally returns home to Ithaca after 20 long years, he realizes it's not the same home he left behind. He's been gone so long that nobody even knows if he's dead or alive. Back home, his wife Penelope is backed into a corner. She's being forced to choose a new husband from a pack of greedy suitors. Why? Because their son Telemachus isn't quite old enough or strong enough yet to be crowned king, and she urgently has to marry someone who can actually build an army to save Ithaca from the looming threat of the sea people. Now, on paper, this sounds like a standard historical epic, but the Odyssey is perfect for Nolan to adapt because it suits his directorial style flawlessly. If you have ever read Homer's original poem, you know it is inherently non-linear. The story jumps back and forth, piecing itself together, which is exactly how Nolan approaches his filmmaking. So here too we get a non-linear screenplay, but I will say this right now. This is easily the most accessible of all his films. He jumps from one timeline to another and it all feels incredibly organic. It's structured almost like Odysseus is having visceral flashbacks, which are then integrated into the tense sequences happening simultaneously back in Ithaca. Nolan is jumping from one sequence to another and the pacing just feels incredibly right. It's obvious from the first frame that Nolan has given his absolute all to this film. My jaws were practically on the floor and my mind was entirely blown looking at the pure spectacle of it all. I honestly don't know the last time I felt this kind of awe sitting in a movie theater. Some of the sequences are so overwhelmingly good that I found myself taken out of the movie just thinking, how on earth did he capture this on a camera? Because in true Nolan fashion, most of this film is shot practically on location. Yes, there are obviously some VFX and touches of CGI to enhance what's already on camera, but it is strictly used only where absolutely necessary. When you sit there knowing that the majority of what you're seeing is real, practical filmmaking, it blows your mind. Let's talk about some of these sequences, starting with the cave scene, which is hands down my absolute favorite of the entire movie. In that specific moment, Nolan completely changes the genre of the film. It stops being an epic and turns straight into a terrifying horror film. The way the Cyclops' massive hand slowly comes into the frame, it was genuinely terrifying. I actually got scared in my seat. Then we have the sequence where Odysseus and his crew are fighting for their lives against these towering 10-foot tall soldiers. That is some brutal visceral action choreography. Follow that up with the infamous pig sequence and of course that bloody cathartic final fight in the halls of Ithaca. Of course, a spectacle needs a soul and we get through some truly great performances. Matt Damon is the star of this film. He carries this massive sprawling epic squarely on his shoulders and he is perfect. He's jacked up like an absolute tank, but he carries himself with this heavy exhaustion. He feels like an old, deeply tired guy, which makes him the absolute perfect iteration of Odysseus. That weariness was exactly what was needed to ground the character. He plays a guy who is highly flawed. Sometimes he makes brilliant tactical decisions, and other times really silly, arrogant ones. It makes him deeply human and infinitely interesting. But let's talk about Himesh Patel because he somehow manages to completely outshine Matt Damon in one or two pivotal scenes. Honestly, you can easily call him the second hero of the entire film. He commands the screen every time he's on it. Then we have Annie Hathaway as Penelope. She brings her absolute best, especially in the film's heavy emotional beats. There is a specific scene where she fiercely closes her door right in the face of Mia Goth, and it is arguably the most rewarding moment for her character. Hathaway brings this raw, simmering emotion, the palpable fury, into a character who has to stand her ground in front of a large number of aggressive men, stand tall, and definitively prove her point. Tom Holland also puts in a solid performance. It's just that he's placed in front of such monumental powerhouse talents that he can't quite outshine them just yet. But the guy definitely proves he's got some serious acting chops. Honestly, every single member of the supporting cast did a fantastic job. Before we get into my final thoughts, I want to establish my own stance and talk about few things that I genuinely did not like, starting with the siren sequence. I don't know if this scene was heavily censored here in India or if it's like this everywhere globally, but something felt incredibly off. Sirens in mythology are meant to be these dangerously beautiful creatures. They are essentially hypnotic mermaids, but here we hardly even see them. We only catch glimpses of them from a vast distance, and the whole sequence felt a little bit sanitized and heavily censored to me. Now, let's talk about Helen of Troy. And hey, let me clear there. I'm absolutely not talking about her skin color. She might be the most beautiful woman in the world for some people, or maybe not. I already have a wife, so I honestly don't care about that internet debate. Lupita is definitely a stunningly good looking actress. However, the makeup department gave her this huge, ugly, distracting scar right across her face, which intentionally makes this version of Helen of Troy look somewhat ugly. Now, there is a moment where John Bernthal physically holds her face, looks at Telemachus, and delivers the iconic line about this being the face that launched a thousand ships. The way it was directed and acted looked so incredibly weird. It felt like his intention in that scene were actively mocking her. It honestly made me feel like this casting choice and the execution of the character might not have been Nolan's organic creative choice. It felt suspiciously like it was forced by studio executives trying to artificially push the film to the Oscars. And to top it off, she is hardly even in the movie. Then we have the Elliot Page situation. The entire film actually begins with her sequence. And I'm not going to lie, that opening run looks like a straight up parody. I mean, the mechanics of the way she was running on screen was really bad. It felt out of place. But later, during the underworld sequence where her character gives a testimony, that scene was perfectly fine. Paige is playing the soldier Sinon. If you know your mythology, Sinon wasn't in Homer's Odyssey. He was added in here, essentially replacing Achilles. There is no Achilles in Christopher Nolan's Odyssey. In the original lore, it was Achilles, who Odysseus meets in Hades, the underworld. Nolan boldly changed it to Sinon. But again, this character is barely in the film. Honestly, it's nothing to worry about. It's not something that will spoil your theatrical experience. It's mostly just internet trolls creating baseless chaos online. Despite those minor gripes, the emotional core of this movie is overwhelmingly strong. I actually think I'm the first person to say this, but Chris Nolan actually made me cry in this film. When Odysseus finally returns and sees his old dog, man, I was literally sobbing in the theater. Plus, the quiet, poignant conversation between Odysseus and his son made me genuinely teary eyed. Nolan rarely hits those emotional chords for me, but he nailed it here. This film is exceptional in so many different ways. Yes, in classic Nolan fashion, sometimes the music and sound mixing is so aggressively loud that I was literally covering my ears in the theater. But you forgive it because the dialogue is pretty fine, and in just 10 short minutes, you get completely sucked into this gritty ancient world. You quickly stop caring whether they are speaking modern English or classical English because the immersion is absolute. This is definitively one of my favorite films of this year. It is one of the greatest cinematic epics of our time, and I guarantee it will be remembered and studied for a very long time. It's dense and it definitely requires a second and even a third watch to fully unpack everything Nolan has put on screen. It is one of those rare films that absolutely demands you to watch it on the biggest screen possible, especially since it holds the title as the very first film to be fully 100% shot on IMAX cameras. So yeah, that is something you cannot miss. Even if you don't watch many movies, this is the one you should go out of your way to see. This is the kind of cinematic event that only comes out of once in a decade. I highly recommend the Odyssey to everyone.